Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, the political assassination of conservative voice Charlie Kirk could impact the federal cannabis reform efforts. We'll hear from Morgan Fox from NORML on the latest on legalization.
This removes the administration's ability to examine cannabis scheduling and to do anything about it, reserving that power entirely to Congress.
And finally, Texas Governor Greg Abbott takes charge of the hemp impasse in his state and uses an executive order to control intoxicating hemp products in Texas. We'll have a reaction from Kerry Hinkle in the Hemp Report.
What is something in those regulations that does still concern you?
Well, obviously, the lieutenant governor has not vacated the state, so we can assume that he will be attempting to influence in some fashion.
And the Trump administration shuts down proposed rules for the DOJ impacting both the hemp and MJ markets, and Andrew Berenger explains from Washington, D.C. And another story about driving under the influence of cannabis reinforces existing studies that despite THC being present in blood tests, that does not lead to impairment. All that and cannabis reports from two continents and coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm executive producer Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who's on assignment in Portugal. Okay, she's not on assignment, but that's where she is, and I'll do the best I can to share this week's news documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition here in the U.S. and around the world. I am Jimmy Young in Massachusetts, but I'll have some help from our news team across the country.
I'm Karen Black in Arizona.
I'm Curtis Emery from Worcester, Massachusetts.
I'm Kimmy Cannabis in Oklahoma.
The shocking political assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah has shaken the soul of this country. The conservative talk show host, podcaster, and Trump insider was not a big fan of cannabis, but he always professed to have an open mind. Perhaps that's the one lesson for all of us who are quick to profile and label each other. Having open conversations over cannabis legalization is progress. Even Charlie Kirk recognized this, and that might be his lasting legacy. He certainly knew how controversial the plant medicine can be.
President Trump said he has not made a final decision, and he is still weighing it. So here is the view that we have on this program. The view that I have in particular is that, of course, marijuana is not good for you. You know, a lot of people will say that, well, marijuana has all these wonderful upsides. You can use it to relax and to go to sleep. We have vastly underestimated. This is the first contention. Even if you are in favor of legalization and in favor of reclassification, you have to agree that there has been a downplaying of the negative parts of widespread and casual and recreational marijuana use.
So what impact will this have on the rescheduling movement in Washington, D.C.? WPCM TV executive producer Jimmy Young gets a legalization and rescheduling update from the political director of NORML, Morgan Fox.
We're so happy to have Morgan Fox, the political director of NORML, with us once again, giving us an update on what is going on in Washington, D.C. towards federal reform. And the first thing that we're going to talk about today is, of course, the GOP's move to try and not allow federal money to be used at all in any rescheduling activities. Morgan, how big an impact is this, and how big an impact could this be on federal reform?
Well, it's certainly an interesting move on the House's part, especially considering that the Senate did not include that language in its version of the CJS bill. And I honestly think that this provision does not stand a really good chance of surviving through a full House floor vote, or through, even if it does get approved in the House, it probably won't survive in conference, because this removes the administration's ability to examine cannabis scheduling and to do anything about it, reserving that power entirely to Congress. I mean, I've always thought that any sort of a rescheduling or descheduling move is probably going to come from Congress anyway, because of the intransigence of the federal government and the edifices of these agencies, which have spent, decades working under the auspices of prohibition and supporting those auspices. But at the same time, it's politically interesting for Congress to try to take away the ability of the administration to address this issue, despite the fact that the president has said it is something that they're looking at, and that certainly want to retain the power to be able to make moves on if they so desire.
Our president likes to do executive decisions outside of Congress sometimes. I wonder if he may actually just say, you know what, I'm tired of dealing with this. Here, we're going to just reschedule it with an executive order. Is that possible?
No. The president can direct federal agencies to pursue these things, but the process is very long and drawn out.
We know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the president cannot, with the stroke of a pen, just say like cannabis is rescheduled or descheduled, but the president's office can direct these federal agencies that are under executive control to actively pursue the process in an expedited manner. Mm-hmm. And if Section 607 of the CJS bill becomes law, those agencies will not be able to do that. And that power will be reserved solely to Congress, at least for the coming fiscal year. But we don't know for sure whether or not any sort of appropriations bills are going to pass, because it looks like we're quickly barreling towards a continuing resolution in which the previous fiscal year's budget is carried on with maybe some minor tweaks into the next year because of Congress being unable to actually pass budget legislation and wanting to avoid a total shutdown, which is coming up in about 20 days.
And this is the way our government works these days, isn't it? When they're on deadline to shut down, that's when things get done, I guess. I mean, that's
no, I mean, that's when they throw up their hands and say, we're just going to do what we did last year.
The rest of that interview will be released in our Thursday special report this week. And later in the show, I'll have an editorial about the impact of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the political impasse in this country, and how cannabis is right in the middle of it. Now, there was another item out of D.C. this week, and once again, the Republican-controlled Congress wants to shut down all federal funds for any further rescheduling efforts. Andrew Berenger has more from the nation's capital.
I'm Andrew Berenger with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a recent move reflecting ongoing debates over cannabis policy, a GOP-controlled House committee has voted to block efforts to reschedule cannabis at the federal level. The House Appropriations Committee has approved a spending bill that explicitly prevents the Justice Department from using any federal funds to move cannabis from its current Schedule I status. Now, is there any silver lining, you may ask? Well, this new legislation includes a rider which aims to preserve long-standing protections for state medical cannabis programs, ensuring federal interference remains limited. However, it introduces tougher penalties for distributing cannabis near schools, parks, and public housing, a move aimed at addressing concerns over community safety. Now, this bill also maintains protections for hemp research and affirms that the federal authorities can enforce laws against cannabis distribution near sensitive areas. Now, this debate over cannabis federal status continues, with the legislation signaling ongoing resistance to changing federal drug classifications. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Berenger reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Over the past 4 months, the state of Texas has been trying to figure out how to reel in and regulate that state's $5.6 billion hemp industry. After using his veto power to stop a total hemp ban earlier in the summer, Governor Greg Abbott called 2 special sessions of his state legislature. The Senate there is controlled by and led by the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who got his followers to pass another hemp ban bill. But he never got the House to agree. So the governor's executive action will allow the hemp industry to survive while still providing regulations that include tighter age gating. It will also ban all combustible THC-infused smokable products and require strict testing similar to the medical cannabis program that has recently expanded. With more on what is going on in Texas is our own hemp reporter, Carrie Hinkle.
This is Carrie Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the second week of September, we see a final resolution in the long saga that has been the Texas legislature. As you may remember, in the last few months, both during regular session and the subsequent two special sessions, the legislature, the governor, and in particular the lieutenant governor have been unable to find a compromise on all things hemp regulation. That is why this week, Governor Abbott issued an executive order that requires the Department of State Health Services, DISHES, to work with TABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, to implement some much needed regulation on the industry. This includes 21 and up by only selling these products to adults, truth in labeling and elimination of lookalike products, and also a study to subsequently be had at A&M to look at how to implement larger regulations during the next session, and industry feedback will be welcomed alongside law enforcement and others in this commission at A&M. So the governor is taking short-term action on some products as well as establishing a commission to look at how to properly regulate these for the long term during the next session. Now, the part that's most interesting in the hemp industry right now is a new requirement for total THC testing standards. We've seen other states like Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Kentucky implement total THC testing standards with an effort and a direct attack on hemp flower. So while we still wait for DISHES and TABC to implement rulemaking and take industry feedback and understand exactly what the governor can and can't do with his executive order, by issuing a total THC testing standard, many in the industry view this as a direct attack on hemp flower availability. So we will see how that category is specifically handled here soon, but the larger industry of beverage, edibles, topicals, tinctures, etc. is now safe thanks in part to Governor Abbott and his executive order. This is a clear attempt to implement regulation rather than prohibition of a large $6 to $7 billion industry that many adults in Texas currently enjoy. So thank you for all that have been following along in the last few months of this long saga. We are thankful here at Bayou City Hemp for Governor Abbott and his action with the executive order. But again, I am Carrie Hinkle with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Thanks, Carrie. As always, a great job, and congratulations to the Bayou City Hemp Group for finally having those regulations that they've been asking for. Joining us now from the state of Texas is Cynthia Cabrera from Hometown Hero. She's the strategic principal with that organization, and she was very much involved with the I don't even know if I can call it a dog and pony show in your state anymore, because it has been a fascinating ride during these two special sessions. And now finally, Governor Abbott perhaps did the right thing for the industry. Do you feel confident that now you have working regulations that the industry can survive and thrive?
Well, contrary to the rhetoric that the lieutenant governor, shot out for 9 months or whatever, the industry has already had regulation since 2019. So what the the only thing that was missing, the only important element that was missing was an age gate, which is something that we as an industry had been pushing for 3 legislative sessions and were unable to achieve because, it would have given the industry, we were told, it would give the industry legitimacy and it would take away a big talking point if we were able to get the age gate. So I am grateful that the executive order that the governor put out includes an immediate age gate, and then the rest of the instructions in there are, the devil is in the details.
Right. So let's talk about some of those details. As someone who's in that industry, what are you most concerned with the executive orders? And of course, the thing about an executive order is, okay, that's in place now. The government doesn't shut down. You guys can still make changes if you have enough people behind you. But point is, what is something in those regulations that does still concern you?
Well, obviously, the lieutenant governor has not vacated the state. So we can assume that he will be attempting to influence in some fashion, whatever, what that review of regulation looks like. And I think that enforcement passes over to TABC, which is fine. And then everything else stays with DISHES, and DISHES has to review. And DISHES is the Department of Safety and Human Services or something. And so they have to review the existing regulations to see if they need beefing up or firming up or anything like that. And what's interesting is that agencies in Texas have to review their rules every 4 years. And the DISHES actually reviewed all the hemp rules last year. And made no changes. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. And again, the devil is in the details. Who is keeping an eye on the ball? Who is trying to perhaps win where they didn't get one previously, through another method. So we just have to continue being vigilant.
Most of the over 8,000 hemp-based businesses in Texas are breathing a sigh of relief now after the latest reform of hemp laws in Texas have been signed by the governor. Now, did you know that industry employs over 50,000 people and generates millions of dollars in tax dollars in Texas? And it certainly didn't make much sense to ban and shut down an industry in that state. Unfortunately, now they won't have to. Next up is our Virginia reporter, Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. After months of announcement, the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority has finally launched the online portal that bridges the gap between patients, providers, and cannabis partners to streamline the medical market in the Commonwealth. The portal contains a wealth of information and resources for patients and can help many questions that revolve around the confusing market. The Control Authority's portal is ready to also integrate with the hopefully upcoming adult use market to fully integrate both medical and recreational into a clear, coherent environment for everyone. Please log on to www.cca.virginia.gov for more details. Next up, the 11th District had a special election to replace longtime Democratic Representative Jerry Connolly, who sadly passed away this May from cancer. In a clear, decisive victory over Republican candidate Stuart Whitson, the Democrats kept control of the massive 11th District. This is important because if Winston Earl Sears wins the governor's desk, she's likely to continue the former governor's prohibitionist agenda. And maintaining balance in the House and keeping a strong Democratic presence will make fighting potential vetoes an achievable goal for 2026. And lastly, I'd like to thank my guest this week on Coffee Talk, WPCM-TV's very own Canadian correspondent, Debbie Facey. Always an awesome speaker, we discussed how the Canadian cannabis system, while not perfect, has proven that a uniform cannabis market with consistent rules and regulations, like we do with alcohol here in America, can create a safe and fair marketplace for both medical and adult use markets. Fun fact, did you know that last year over 70% of Canada bought their cannabis products legally from an approved vendor? Proving a market ran correctly can actually reduce crime and ensure better product for everyone. Thanks, Debbie, for being on the show. Check it out at www.3wv.com. Well, that's going to do it for Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
Well, that will do it for the A block, our first section of our Cannabis Coast to Coast news show this week. But when we come back, we'll check in on the international cannabis scene, plus more state reports, including a story about a strike at a medical dispensary in Pennsylvania. Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For this past week, I'm executive producer Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who is in Portugal. This is the B Block, and that's when we take a look at what is going on the other side of the pond, called the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where our European market is starting to take off. A few weeks ago, we shared the story of the future for adult use sales in Switzerland. Well, now that country is looking at a country-run operation designed to be a nonprofit in order to control costs and meet consumer demand. Cannavigia is the company that was part of that country's pilot program and now has a 10-year contract with the Swiss government to be in control of the entire market. It remains to be seen if they can come up with the quality of the product that will meet consumer demand. Now let's check in on the UK with Dave Barton from Thermador.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Researchers across the UK are investigating whether CBD can treat psychotic symptoms in Parkinson's patients. Some 3 out of 5 sufferers experience hallucinations, while other studies show that CBD may reduce psychosis. Until now, no definitive data has been collected on Parkinson's patients. The NHS said the trial could in fact be safer than current treatments for the condition, which were deemed not effective, safe, or convenient for regular use. 120 people will take part in the study over a 12-week period. This news follows the publication of 2 new studies that suggest cannabis-based medicines may improve sleep quality and reduce insomnia, with non-CBD formulations showing particular promise. That's all for this week's UK Report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week are some of the studies that are coming out, especially when it comes to eradicating cannabis. There is something called an e-beam that most of the LPs do use when it comes to their microbes. And with them using this e-beam, what it does, it not only kills the microbes, but it also degrades the THC potency. That is something that we are finding across the board, and most LPs are trying to find a way to be able to attack any sort of microbes or infections without degrading the THC potency. So that is something that we hope to see along. Also, what we're finding is that Alberta is also doing secondary testing when it comes to their cannabis due to the fact that some of their cannabis is not compliant due to their THC potency as well. So we are seeing this throughout Canada. And last but not least, we have MTL Canada that is introducing their vape pens, and that is going to be alongside with our THC potency alliance and as well as the terpene profiles, ensuring that they're not going to be using any false ones. Also, they have entered the Australian market, which is great, which means that we're going to be seeing a lot more Canadian cannabis being shared throughout the world with all of our other tokers. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
One state that is slowly moving away from total prohibition is the state of Georgia, where a pharmaceutical medical program is in place, and now some counties are decriminalizing the plant altogether. This week, Clayton County reduced its possession of cannabis laws to a misdemeanor. They now join major cities like Atlanta, Savannah, and Statesboro, which have replaced jail time for simple possession of under an ounce of cannabis with a misdemeanor, non-criminal offense. Next up, the state of Massachusetts. That's where Curtis Emery has been telling us the story of a new prohibitionist movement in that state that is trying to collect enough signatures to get an important question on the ballot that would recriminalize the existing adult use regulations. Here's Curtis.
My name's Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate, Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A continuing story here in Massachusetts as the state moves one step closer to finalize guidance on social consumption here in the Commonwealth. The CCC closed the public comment period for these newly proposed regulations on social consumption here in the state. Now, the CCC has been working for a few years to try to nail down just how they would like to move forward with social consumption in Massachusetts. That period, the period for public comment, is now over, which means it is up to the CCC to vote on the finalized regulations for this new era in mass cannabis. We look forward to seeing what happens when the CCC reconvenes to vote on these regulations. Also in the news this week marked the 4th annual THC Open. This time in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, the THC Open aims to bring cannabis, golf, wellness, and a little bit of business all together for some good times on the green. Big brands like Ethos, INSA, and local banks were there to celebrate the industry and have a good time at the same time. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In just a few years since the legal adult use market started to prosper, the importance of tracking the sale and distribution of cannabis became paramount. A company called Metric dominates seed-to-sale tracking in a majority of the 24 legal adult use states, and now you can add the state of New York to the list of Metric states. New York first tried to use another company, BioTrack, and now Metric and BioTrack have combined efforts to work together in the emerging billion-dollar market in the Empire State. New York had problems early on with licensing, and those continue to some extent, but sales are quickly living up to expectations. Just recently, total sales surpassed $2 billion, with over $1 billion sold this year alone. They will surpass last year's sales for sure, since there are still 4 months to go. This past weekend, New York City was filled with revelry. That's the 2-day celebration of cannabis culture in the Big Apple. It enjoyed another huge success. Revelry is where the industry takes over Pier 36 in Manhattan, and it's where our own Oregon correspondent, Marianne Corsaggi, was showcasing her Alibi brand. Revelry started in 2014 as a small networking event before cannabis was legalized for adult use. Now, the 2-day event features a B2B day for the industry and another day for consumers. Vendors, educational panels, parties, and networking all celebrate the diversity and passion of the Big Apple's cannabis scene. Special thanks to our friends from Maverick Public Relations for providing us with some video from this year's event.
2 more news stories out of the Bay State, and this one's a good one. Levia, a popular drink brand here in the Commonwealth, which was started in 2017 to offer no sugar, no calorie, fast-acting cannabis beverages, is returning to its original owners. Levia was bought by Air Wellness, the disgraced multi-state operator who shuttered all of its production here in the Bay State, leaving hundreds out of jobs and shaking up the market a little bit. Well, the original owners of Levia are able to buy their product back, and they're very excited about that. In a statement, the owners said, "Bringing Levia home is a deeply personal milestone for us. The brand was born from our garage, from the belief in the power of cannabis. to break stigma and offer healthier alternatives. We're so proud to continue that mission alongside our incredible employees. Their dedication has been at the heart of Levia, and together we're ready to scale the brand, expand into new markets, and to write the next chapter while staying true to our mission and values. Another news story here in Massachusetts, the beloved vertically integrated brand Bountiful Farms has added 2 new dispensaries to their suite of locations. Bountiful Farms' flagship location is a medical-only store located in Natick, but with the acquisition of a new store in Rowley and Framingham, Bountiful Farms expands its adult use options significantly. Locations were previously owned by the Cape Inn Dispensary Group and will be taken over by Bountiful Farms. Their storefront count goes from 1 to 3. We're excited to see how that continues to influence the market. And now to see what's going on in Oklahoma, let's hand it over to Kimmy Cannabis.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma cannabis culture continues to shine thanks to passionate advocates and influencers across the state. This past weekend, we brought our podcast to the community event Harvest Fest, where we sat down with voices helping to break the stigma. 2 inspiring canna moms, Kimberly Green and Heather Hudson, better known as the Giggle Twins, reminded us why home growing is so important, especially for keeping consistent medicine available for their children who are patients. Christopher Wright highlighted how far cannabis education has come, reminding us that you can now earn degrees in cannabis studies and gain knowledge on all the cannabinoids, not just THC and CBD. Mario's Mixed Media shared his vision for a future self-sustaining farm designated to double as an addiction recovery option, combining healing with sustainability. And Randy Kay is adding a holistic twist to the culture with unique events like Wake and Bake Yoga, creating a welcoming space for wellness and community. A special shout out goes to Debbie Wood, who was honored with the award for Favorite Activist. She spends countless hours collecting signatures and doing the hard work needed to move cannabis legalization forward here in Oklahoma. Each of these influencers and advocates is helping break the stigma. And as a canna-friendly hair designer myself, I'm personally grateful for the work they're doing to normalize plant medicine in everyday life. That's it from Can I Talk About It for Cannabis Coast to Coast News in Oklahoma. I'm Kimmy Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Pennsylvania lawmakers are still in search of the right mix of reforms to help launch their adult use market. However, the state does boast a very vibrant medical cannabis community. The Keystone State has 191 medical dispensaries, which services over 400,000 medical card holders. Now, one of those dispensaries, owned by Green Thumb Industries called Rise, is facing labor unrest. Employees of Rise are looking for fair treatment and better wages and have reached out to Teamsters to unionize. As of late, however, employees are claiming that labor talks need to break down because the company isn't acting in good faith. Now, with many states that look at budgetary shortfalls, Michigan chose to solve this problem through increased taxes on cannabis products in the state. More on that story and how the state covered the shortfall, we turn to Amy Carter, whose Michigan report is now sponsored by Wally's Wonderland Customized Humidors.
This is mold on wheat bread. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonder World plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the homemade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There, you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom homemade humidor from Wally'sWonderworld.com and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Michigan's cannabis community is buzzing with concern as lawmakers consider a hefty new 32% wholesale cannabis tax to fund road repairs. This proposed tax could hit the wallets of consumers and businesses, threatening to undermine the industry and drive people back to the illicit market. There is a coalition being formed against these new taxes. It is probably a good idea to call your lawmakers at this time and oppose them. It's another week and another vape recall has hit the Michigan cannabis scene. The CRA has issued a recall for Top Smoke Go-Kart Runt cartridges sold at 75 dispensaries due to banned additives. If you have this product, do not use it. Workers at Exclusive Ann Arbor are now in their second week on strike, making a bold stand for fair labor practices. All eyes are on this rare unionized dispensary as the workers fight for a better deal. The 5th annual Harvest Rally in Lansing was a huge success, bringing together the Michigan cannabis community for a day of advocacy and celebration. The energy was electric as supporters rallied for small businesses, patients, caregivers, pushing for a brighter future for the cannabis industry. On September 25th, visit our sponsor Wally's Wonderworld at Hazy Holes Cannabis Classic at Indian Hills Golf Course on Saturday, September 27th at 9 a.m. I am Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
One of the most contentious issues that faces the cannabis industry is the challenge that lawmakers and law enforcement have when identifying cannabis-infused drivers. Being able to tell which drivers are impaired and which ones are using the plant medicine responsibly is a legal issue that is still very much up in the air since the plant stays in your system for 30 days. Of course, if you happen to be one of the 20% of people in adult use states who consume it daily, your tolerance will be a lot stronger than newbies or first-timers. Now, the University of California at San Diego did a controlled research study on impairment by regular users after 2 days of abstention. Many in the industry call any break from regular daily use a tolerance break. The study concluded that drivers showed no impairment after 48 hours after their consumption. Now, let's check in with Jenny Germano with our Colorado report for this week.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A new lawsuit in Colorado is challenging how the federal government is monitoring cannabis businesses. At the center of the case are questions about whether the IRS is stepping into the role of drug enforcement, something critics say it's not supposed to do. It could have big consequences for how cannabis businesses are treated nationwide. The case was filed by a dispensary located in Rifle, Colorado, on the western slope, and it accuses the Internal Revenue of doing more than just reviewing their tax returns. The claim is that the IRS has been used as an investigative arm for the Department of Justice and the DEA, issuing broad summons and conducting what the plaintiffs call mass audits of cannabis operators. Attorneys for the dispensary argue that this practice violates federal restrictions. Congress has specifically prohibited the DOJ and DEA from spending money to interfere with state, medical, and adult use cannabis programs. The lawsuit suggests that the IRS is being used as a workaround, gathering evidence that the drug enforcement agencies can't collect directly. The IRS strongly rejects those claims. In its response, the agency called the allegations illogical and baseless. Officials insist that the audits are focused on whether these businesses owe additional taxes, not about prosecuting drug crimes. They also pointed out if the DEA wanted to bring criminal charges, it could do so more directly without relying on tax records. This lawsuit shines a spotlight on the ongoing clash between states and federal law. Colorado legalized medical cannabis more than 2 decades ago, and adult use sales have been allowed since 2014. Yet cannabis remains federally illegal, which means every state licensed business still operates in a kind of legal gray area. The outcome of this case could help determine how far federal agencies can go when investigating the industry and whether cannabis operators have additional protections when they are following state law. For now, the lawsuit is moving forward, and many in the industry are watching this closely, because the decision could set a precedent for cannabis businesses well beyond Colorado. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Well, that will do it for the B Block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News for this week. Coming up, more state reports and a story of an MSO based in Massachusetts that is dealing with $1 million fine by the IRS and the impact on its operations in Illinois. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block, or third section, of this week's news report. I am Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who will be back from Portugal at the end of this month. Trust me, she'll be here. In the meantime, we continue to document the fight to end cannabis prohibition in the U.S. and around the world. There was another significant milestone in the state of Minnesota this past week. That's when Governor Tim Walz signed a Commence Operations Executive Order to give a second Native American tribe a license to commence operations and open the doors. Tina Tasaka has more on that story from Nevada and in her Tribal Nations report.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board issued a public health and safety bulletin warning people to avoid or use caution with 42 specific cannabis items sold between April 1st and August 29th at 20 stores, including Thrive Cannabis Marketplace in Reno. The issue, some pre-rolls and whole flower products failed secondary lab tests for microbial contamination, yeast, mold, and or aspergillus, or the lots couldn't be retested. If you have one of those lot numbers, here's how to remedy your purchase. Check your product lot number, compare it against the CCB Bulletin's list of affected lots. Avoid using the product if it matches an impacted lot. Contact the retailer where you bought it from, for example, Thrive Cannabis Marketplace, and ask for a refund, exchange, or safe disposal guidance. Contact the Cannabis Compliance Board too. They have consumer reporting options. In tribal news, the Minnesota tribal market continues to build and thrive. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has signed the state's second tribal state cannabis compact, this one with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Under state law, Walz is directed to work with tribal nations that share territory with Minnesota to create a safe, consistent adult use cannabis market. The Mille Lacs Agreement focuses on product testing, data sharing, and consumer protections, while also opening opportunities for collaboration between the tribe and state-licensed businesses. Walz emphasized that these compacts strengthen partnerships and ensure both the state and tribes benefit from the emerging cannabis industry. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and iconic representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Nebraska continues to battle with advocates in that state and stop the democratic process in its tracks. Voters approved a ballot initiative a few years ago, paving the way to start a medical program. Now the governor there, a Republican named Jim Pillen, told the Cannabis Regulatory Commission to not approve any more cultivation licenses and cap the whole process. The governor wants to limit the number of plants to just 1,250. The governor fears an overabundance of the plant will depress prices and drive patients back to the legacy market. Now let's check in with Karen Black in Arizona.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's medical cannabis landscape is hitting a crossroads. Local advocacy groups and researchers are urgently calling on state officials to unlock $2 million earmarked for clinical research targeting conditions like autism, epilepsy, and PTSD. Despite broad support and legislative approval, bureaucratic delays are keeping these funds from researchers who say more scientific data could directly benefit patients and help medical dispensaries find new ways to serve their communities. Meanwhile, regulators are tightening up. The FDA sent a warning letter to Arizona-based True Balance about their CBD eye drops, which the company claims treat pink eye and macular degeneration. The agency says these products are unapproved drugs and could have risky side effects, particularly for direct eye application. The warning is part of a larger push for stricter oversight of health claims in the CBD product market. Arizona's retail cannabis numbers reflect the pressure. August brought in just over $91 million in sales, with average prices down slightly to about $17 per item. That's nearly a 9% year-over-year drop, and the flower category saw a 15% decline from last August. Opportunities are shifting as price competition and saturated shelves make operating margins tighter for most businesses. The medical market is feeling the squeeze more than anyone. Second quarter medical purchases plunged 26% compared to a year ago as patients opt for adult use purchases instead. Across the state, medical cardholder numbers are dropping, and dispensaries focused on medical products are facing layoffs and tough decisions about their business models. In other news, the Arizona State University Cannabis Legal Association just announced their new president, Janae Daw, and vice president, Tristan Brown. Their leadership is expected to bring fresh momentum to cannabis policy discussions and professional development on campus. It's clear Arizona's cannabis market is going through a critical transition. Connecting all these threads, unlocking those dedicated research funds isn't just about advancing science. It could reinvigorate the medical cannabis industry at a time when it's losing ground. With fewer patients and less revenue, evidence-based research could help define new uses, expand market appeal, and ultimately provide the foundation for a sustainable future in Arizona cannabis. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Missouri continues to make tweaks to the cannabis industry rules. That state is quickly becoming one of the most active and supportive of the industry. Now there's a ballot initiative that will actually open up sales of cannabis and intoxicating hemp products in the same location and shops that sell alcohol and tobacco. Missouri already has a vibrant social consumption practice, and mixing at events has not led to any increase in crime or any other threat to the public. Now, let's check in with Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy from Illinois. He has a story of a major fine for MaryMed, a vertically integrated multi-state operator based in Massachusetts with a number of dispensaries operating in Illinois.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry I've been MIA last few weeks. I've been sick and I've been tired working on a clone facility. I will be reporting from a commercial clone facility very soon, possibly next week. But that's not the news I was actually planning on reporting, but that's my personal news, which is big for Illinois. In real news, MaryMed, a local Illinois dispensary, they actually have 5 locations, just got slapped by the IRS with a $6 million lien. It wasn't from the state of Illinois. It was from the feds. It was from, like I said, it's from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, for $6 million. They're attributing this, lack of funds to the fact that the 280E tax code really puts a hurting on, these types of businesses. So, they're dealing with that right now. In other news, I recently reported that about 10 ex-retired cops were opening a dispensary, and people were, questioning the ethical, standards of that. Like, why are there still people in jail from these cops for weed that are now going to be selling weed? So long story short, one of Chicago's aldermen actually put a stop to their dispensary in his territory. So for those exact reasons, he said, that's unethical. There's still people in jail because of these cops that threw them in jail. And now these cops are going to sell weed in it? They're like, no, our town's not having that. So the residents and that alderman put a stop to it in that town. So, and another side question is, most of these cops are black and brown. They're benefiting from the social equity fund for the people that were hurt by cops. So these cops that threw people in jail and still have people in jail are getting money for throwing people in jail now. It's totally backwards, but I get it. But that's America. That's how it works. But that's pretty interesting. But that sums up the news for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with over-the-top renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News with your weekly Ohio update. While we have no legal changes here in Ohio yet, there's not been any update as to whether there'll be any more votes from the Senate or the House. We do have some activity as far as products available to us here in Ohio, whereas Cheech and Chong have now partnered with Riviera Creek, and are bringing their products here to Ohio with what they started as be legacy with innovation. So we at least look forward to that, and hopefully we'll find out something soon as to what's going to happen here with the movement legally here in Ohio. Thank you. I am Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio update with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Shares of Cresco Labs stock ticker CRLBF have jumped 25% over the past month, fueled by hopes of federal cannabis reform and a focus on operational discipline. But behind the pop, the charts tell a more complicated story as it pulls back. Cresco's trimming the fat, exiting California's costly and highly competitive market while holding on to its premium FloraCal brand. They also refinanced $325 million in debt to ease near-term pressure and improve liquidity. But sales remain sluggish. Second quarter revenue slipped 11% year over year to $163 million, and margins are under pressure from price compression and fierce competition. Unlike rivals Curaleaf and Tilray, Cresco is 100% U.S. focused, meaning no international lifeline if domestic markets keep tightening. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around 98 cents after running up to $1.62, and it is pulling back. It looks like it has some more pullback, but when we get to that bottom, we'll have to check it out and see if it wants to run back up. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
We've got some breaking news this week. The nominations for the 2025 MJ International Cannabis Awards were announced this past week. This is one of the highlights every year at MJ BizCon in Las Vegas. This year's MJ Awards will be held on December 4th during the conference, which runs from December 2nd through 5th. There are awards in 20 categories, like for cultivation, business and financial services, packaging, and retail and culinary experiences, and the very last one is for Best Journalist. Executive producer of this show, Jimmy Young, has been nominated along with Rochelle Gordon from Green State, Javier Hassi from Benzinga and High Times, Lex Pelger, podcaster from the Lex Files based in Europe, who was an original member of our Weed Talk news team, Dustin Hawksworth, the editor-in-chief of Fat Nugs magazine, and Mika King from Cash Color Podcasts. Obviously, we want you to vote for your favorite in all these categories, but I'm voting for Jimmy. We made a QR code that takes you right to the MJ's website where you can vote for him too. Jimmy really doesn't think of himself as a journalist anymore, but he's honored to be mentioned alongside some of the others in the business who all do a great job. You can vote once a day for the next 2 months, so let's get Jimmy and MJ to go with his Emmy.
Just a quick mention of thanks for the Fairchild Event Group and MJ BizCon for this past week's nomination for an MJ. It's the category that is a favorite journalist. And now I got to tell you, I've been flattered by this recognition, but my days as a journalist for sports was 30 years ago. Now I'm the executive producer and a content creator, interviewer, and trainer of the Cannabis Coast to Coast news team. We're so lucky to have a network quality talent and personality from Boston, Elena Pinto, as our main news anchor, and all of our volunteer contributors to this program give their time every week to share their insight on what is going on in their state. Now, you could call me whatever you want, but in my soul, I really am a teacher and a coach. So thank you again for the nomination. Nothing gives me more pleasure now than seeing one of our volunteer contributors become more comfortable on camera and more confident in life. Here's one of our newest reporters from Minnesota, Alicia Bellamy, with a look back at last week's Doobie Dabbler Festival.
I'm Alicia Bellamy with Cannabis Coast to Coast News here at the Doobie Dabbler. Is this everything you expected?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what you expect in an event like this where it's just we just kind of throw everything at it. I mean, I got guys in armor fighting right now. I got this joint costume going around, Mr. Doobie. I got all this live music and more vendors than I really thought would show up. It's just been, honestly, the best vibes, been really good people. The crowd has just had an incredible energy, and everyone's just been walking through a grate. It's just had a smile on their face. And so I didn't know what to expect for the second year. You know, we work out a lot of kinks in the process, but it's been way better than I ever could have hoped.
I was here last year, and this is so much bigger. And last year was super lit. I'm Alicia Bellamy, and I am the Outreach Director for Social Equity. I reach out to people that we promised this grant to. We wrote a contract with the state of Minnesota, the DEED program. to help training for cultivation and for retail. So happy to have received the grant, and so happy to be a part of the Minnesota Cannabis College. Jimmy Young is a Emmy Award-winning journalist, and he is the producer of the show, and I'm so happy to be a part of that. I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Alicia. And you know what? We're all one news team here at Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So for the entire news team, I'm Jimmy Young. Thanks for watching. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly, and I promise Elena Pinto will be back in a few weeks.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Elena Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.